Hi, my name is Ben Melsky. I'm the harpist and executive director of Ensemble Niente, and I will be the harp soloist for Hilda Paredes' Demente Cuerda.
Hi, I'm Hilda Paredes. I'm the composer of this piece, which I'm very honored to have this collaboration with Niente, whom I have had the pleasure of getting to know this year in virtually known, because all our communication has had to be in Zoom, like most people in the world right now. Yeah, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to have a second performance of a work of mine. Well, the first performance of the Mente Cuerda at Library of Congress, but second piece that is being programmed there. So I'm very happy to be back at the Library of Congress. Thank you for having us.
Hilda, can you tell us a little bit about the piece and how it came to be?
Yes, I wrote this piece in 2004. So I had been going for a few years to a festival in Valencia in Spain called Ensemble. It was a festival of new music. It is a festival of new music. It's still happening. And it was my first collaboration, my first commission to write something for the ensemble, the Spanish ensemble group Instrumental de Valencia, which was conducted or is conducted still by Joan Cerveró. And since we have had a few collaborations, so they asked me to write a piece, and they invited me to hear the ensemble. And I really like the harpist. Luisa Dominguez was a harpist in those days. I am not sure if she still works with them. So I chose to write a piece. Joan asked me if I could write perhaps a concerto for one of the members of the ensemble, so I chose the harpist. And yes, harp is very close to my heart because as a child I was able to play the harp, of course the diatonic harp without pedals, as part of a children's ensemble in Mexico City, where I began to learn music, and we played some music that was specially composed for us by our teacher, who devised a lot of, adapted a lot of children's nursery and songs to be performed as proper concert music. So that was my first contact with the harp. And yes, of course, this is now why I chose to write a harp ensemble. The title comes from, it has many meanings, and I like that because as it's written, Demente Cuerda means demented strings, or demented string. But if you don't read it and you just say Demente Cuerda, it could also mean of sound mind. So it has multiple meanings, and therefore the possibilities of adapting itself to whatever you like with the music. And the piece is basically, yes, a dialogue between the soloist and the ensemble.
I think one of the things that I love about the piece is how the harp is used in so many ways, and you sort of weave them all together into the whole piece, where the harp is both contributes to a texture that's being created, whether it's really high, sort of brilliant, shimmery kind of things, if it's bendy notes with the strings and basses and celli, or or even just kind of like almost rhapsodic, like evocative kind of melodies. And another thing that I like to think of as sort of like really interesting melodies that just kind of snake around the instrument, high, middle, and low register really quickly, and how much sort of dynamic writing not necessarily dynamic in terms of volume, but just the range of writing for the harp is really interesting and kind of unusual for a concerto. And I was interested just in how you thought of what were you interested in exploring in the harp, and what were you what questions did you have that you wanted to think about, and how did you think about all these different elements in the harp writing?
Well, I kind of like very angular melodies, which is, I think, what you're describing, that melodies that jump around the ranges. I think that's very much part of my language, not just for the harp, but also for the piano, like sort of kind of keyboard type of instruments, because you have the two hands, so you're able to make these links between the ranges. And then the harmony can be quite, the melody can be quite expressive if you expand it in range. Because of course the harp, being a plucked instrument, doesn't sustain. So this also gives me the possibility of creating harmonies if I sustain these notes, these melodic notes, with the rest of the ensemble. So this is also that something that I explored in the piece, the way to expand the sonorities of the harp, and to not just make them resonate longer in time, but also transform itself and create textures around these harmonies that are being created. So that's one aspect, using the ensemble as a way of maybe like a speakers, colorful speakers that can sort of transform and distort the sound of the harp. So the harp proposes and the ensemble comments or expands or transforms and proposes at the same time, and the harp takes over. I have also explored in a section of one section of the piece, maybe the most virtuosic part, some very rhythmic ideas which I was exploring at the time. So therefore the change of different meters in the bars. And this is something I have continuously explored in different works of mine. And it also happens in this piece. It is perhaps this is what gave me the idea of madness, no?
That was going to be another follow-up question that I had thought of this morning. Was, one of the great challenges, certainly, of traditional harp writing is addressing the issue of the sustain. And I think that a version of the way that challenge is expressed in new music is not just sustain, but how do you alter a pitch, or how do you alter a sound that the harp generates? And you have some really creative approaches that I think are worth maybe pointing out. You have the harmonics being played with a tuning peg glissando. You have some 3-finger plucks with buzzes, which are really interesting. And I just wanted to ask you about those techniques and maybe highlight how they sort of function in the concept of the piece.
Oh, I do love that effect of the harp with the harmonic and the tuning part. It's one of my favorites. It's the first time I've explored that in this piece. I never had tried it. And it's, I just really like it. It's not so common, because I have worked with harpists, orchestral harpists, and they're not so familiar with it, but it's beautiful, really beautiful effect. So this effect, it really, strikes moments of end of certain harmonies, a note of certain harmony in the piece, and at the same time, it brings a different type of sound, which is almost like electronically produced, but it's acoustic. So it brings in another kind of environment to the piece. It's towards the end of the piece. So the harp, if not really very possible to do microtonal melodies. Well, it is possible, but it's very faint. So these chords with 3 fingers strikes or pedal strokes that distort the sound, these are magnified often by the strings, which are able to, this is from the beginning of the piece, are able to play microtonally, like a resonance of this almost percussive sound of the harp. I don't know if I answered your question, did I?
Of course, that's great. I think maybe, and then the final question that I had was, after writing this piece in 2004, is that right?
Yes, right.
After writing the piece, I always love to ask composers, what did writing the piece, what further questions did it raise for you that you were interested in exploring, whether for the harp or for other instruments or format or genre? I love to think about ways in which the work that we did in the past maybe then motivated the next project or the next project, and if it did raise any questions for you, of course, or areas to explore.
Oh, it's a very good question, because it's always like this for me, and this is something that gets harder and harder as I get older, because the more tricks you have up your sleeves as you get older, so to speak. So in this score, I explore quite a lot of techniques which I have continuously explore further and further in pieces after that. Like, for example, towards the end, we have the tone loss, the way the piece ends. The glissandos of harmonics in the strings, for example, is something I had explored quite a lot in my first string quartet, and I explored it further in this piece. And this is something that resonates quite nicely with this effect of the harp, with the tuning fork. It's and it echoes the way the strings respond with the harp, and it makes it sound as if the sound is disappearing and there's just white noise left there, which is the tone loss, or the breath of the winds, or even the tone loss of the strings. Tone loss is a sound without pitch, like a white note. Yeah.
And what are you working on next, or what are you working on now, if you can share that?
I just completed a piece for Klang Art in Berlin. I was just saying I'm very happy. I'm going out to Berlin, and I'm gonna be able to attend first time since lockdown and hear the premiere of this new piece for double bass, percussion, and piano. And it's by the Ensemble of New Music of the Berlin Philharmonic. So I'm very excited at the Philharmonie. And this will be on the 11th of October. And so this is my most recent project.
Well, it sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Hilda. I'm so excited to be performing your piece, and I hope you enjoy.
Yes, I'm sure I will, and I look forward to be able to attend virtually.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Ensemble del Niente's Fellow Travelers podcast. I'm Michael Lewanski, the conductor of Ensemble del Niente. I'm here with Luis Fernando Amaya, a Mexican composer He was born in Aguascalientes, where he is right now, was based in Chicago for a number of years. Luis Fernando is interested in topics such as collective memory, flaw, and the relationship between humans and non-humans. He studied composition and music theory at the Centro de Investigación y Estudios Musicales, also known as CIEM, in Mexico City, and he is a PhD candidate at Northwestern. Are you you're still a candidate? You're done with coursework, right?
Yeah, I'm finishing this this spring, this coming spring.
Oh, great! Congratulations.
Thank you.
Luis Fernando's music has been performed by a bunch of really cool people, including the Arditi Quartet, Spectral Quartet, Mivos Quartet, some group called Ensemble del Niente. He's also a member of a composition and free improvisation trio, Fat Pigeon. You guys just released an album like a month ago or so, right?
Yeah.
What's it called? It's got a particular name.
Yeah, it's called Fang Poet Eye.
Okay. What's that, what's that name from?
Well, all the names of pieces in the album and the album name are anagrams of Fat Pigeon.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so we just found one that we really liked.
that you like, yeah. And you can get the, if you want to buy that album, you can get it on Bandcamp or iTunes or just wherever you find music. Though Bandcamp is the best one, so use that one.
Yeah.
So, Luis Fernando, welcome. Maybe let's talk first about the work of yours that Ensemble del Niente is playing on the show presented by the Library of Congress called Tinta Roja, Tinta Negra. Just tell us about the work if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. So that's a piece that I wrote originally for Quince vocal ensemble. It's a piece that is very personal. Like there's a lot of symbolisms and things that I work with that are kind of like, I mean, in a way, to put it in a way, they're like for me. Like I wanted to work with many ideas and feelings that I was having at that time that had a lot to do with my family on the one hand, and on the other hand with many aspects of collective memory that were kind of like awakened by my reading of the Huehuetlatoli. So the Huehuetlatoli are these it's kind of like pieces of wisdom from the Mexicas or the Aztecs, as most people know them, that were recorded, they were written down in Nahuatl in Spanish by the Spanish priests, like right after the conquest of the great Tenochtitlan, or Mexico City right now. And it's kind of like the remnants of the wisdom of that culture. And reading them in Spanish, because I don't speak Nahuatl, unfortunately, I just had this crazy experience of feeling like I didn't understand anything, even though I could understand the words. I could understand the syntax. I could understand most of what was there, but I also had the feeling that I wasn't understanding anything. And this has a lot to do with the fact that, first of all, Nahuatl wasn't an alphabetized language. It was a mostly oral language that was that did have some, like, well, not some, a lot of pictographic writing, which is really interesting and really complex, and we don't really understand how it worked. But the fact that it wasn't an alphabetized language means many things. One of them is that the meanings get less kind of like ossified within a language. Like it's easier to, it just doesn't work in the same way as alphabetized languages. Like it's a very deep subject. And actually, like if you're interested in how, for example, David Abrams considers the relationship between alphabetic writing and like an epistemological separation between humans and the rest of the world, you should check out David Abrams' The Spell of the Sensuous. It's really interesting. But anyways,
Sorry,
so
the spell of what?
Of the sensuous.
The spell of the sensuous. Okay, great.
Yeah. And anyway, so while I was reading it in Spanish and also knowing a little bit of the background, that like many of the, like it was also a text that was censored by the priests who were writing it down. Like everything that seemed like non-fit for Christian readers was taken out. The names of I don't know, like Tonantzin was changed for like the Virgin Mary. Like it's just such a manipulated text in so many ways, and it also has so many rhetorical figures because Nahuatl is a language that is full of rhetorical figures, and that's why also Mexican Spanish is very much like that. Like, I mean, I know you have learned, studied a lot of it, and you realize how like sometimes to say something, you say something very different. Like to say "qué pasa," you could say "qué pasó tes tamaños zapatitos," you know, like this thing that sounds really weird but makes sense. So while reading this, and even though it had a lot of footnotes explaining that, I don't know, the red and black inks were referring to wisdom because they refer to the codexes, or the like if you say that you're my feather, you're my quetzal feather, that means that, like, you're the most precious thing for me, or I don't really know them by heart. I just felt like I didn't understand anything, and it was really frustrating. You know, it was like reading the shadow of something forever gone, even though now it still exists, and like a lot of cultures that speak that language still exist. That one in particular is forever lost, and that text is like is a record of this in some ways. And I remember reading specifically this portion in which these are like the words that a mother says to her daughter. They're like so beautiful, and this mix between frustration of not understanding most things and fascination and appreciation of its beauty, I don't know, like moved something inside of me. Also because I grew up mainly with my mom and my two sisters, and my dad was always in the picture, but he didn't live with us. So it kind of like also reverberated in that sense, right? Like hearing my mom speaking to my sisters in some way reflected into this very old text. So I remember I got in touch with Quince because of Hans Tomala, and we were like, okay, I'm gonna write a piece for you guys. And the moment I felt this thing while reading the Huehuetlatoli, I was like, okay, I need to work with what I'm feeling and thinking through a piece of music, you know, and in a way that I know that I will not be able to project everything that I'm thinking and feeling, all these like sets of collective memory, kind of like maybe not clashing, but like inhabiting the same space. But it was kind of like a work in that sense for me to explore that on my own. So it was originally for 3 female voices, 2 sopranos and one soprano and 2 altos. No, 2 sopranos and 1 alto. Sorry, it's because I wrote their names in the score instead of like soprano, alto. So I had like Liz, Kaylee. So actually, I even forgot the ranges, which was also interesting, kind of like writing it for them very specifically. And yeah, the idea is that the original piece works like this. You have the 3 singers singing towards jarana, which is a Mexican instrument that I play. Actually, Michael can show you, I think.
Yes. This.
Yeah, beautiful instrument, which is kind of like the grandchild, the Mexican grandchild of the Spanish Baroque guitar. That is very mixed with has a lot of influence from many indigenous groups, influence like the Nahuas specifically, but also other like Totonacas, and a lot of African influence as well. So it's an 8-string instrument that I tune microtonally in different ways so that it would resonate with the notes that I had chosen for the whole piece. So the singers sing towards it, the whole instrument vibrates and the strings vibrate in different ways. And this vibration is captured by 2 contact microphones that go to a PA. So what we're actually listening to is not their voices, but their voices through the wood of this instrument and through the strings. And it also has an electronic track that was made with recordings of Quince singing towards the instrument. So it's all kind of like this idea of this reverberating body with some voices. Also, the original piece had this visual aspect in which I had a screen in front of the singers, and I had some red lights projecting their shadows onto the screen. So we had this contrast of red and black, representing the red and black ink. But also, my idea, and it had some very different interpretations by some by a viewer, but like my original idea was to also kind of like visually not so that the visual attributes of the singers, whoever they were devoided from like racial or social socioeconomic implications, right? My idea is that it could represent three women, whatever, like not from necessarily a specific place or a specific time, three women singing towards this kind of like child, like mixed, like mestizo child that is the jarana. So yeah, that was the original piece, and then well, the Niente asked me if I could make a couple of arrangements for them to perform at the music festival Manuel Enriquez in Mexico City, which is the biggest music festival, I would say, in Mexico. It's really cool. This was in 2018, I believe.
Yeah, maybe actually like the biggest new music festival probably in the North American continent.
Yeah.
I don't think that Canada or the US have anything like. I mean, for US listeners, yeah, the Foro Internacional de Música Nueva, Manuel Enriquez, it's like a 3-week long festival, and it's if you've never been to it or heard of it, it's just bonkers. It's like concerts every day, and multiple orchestras. I remember I talked to Jose Julio Diaz Infante, who was one of your teachers and who runs the festival, and who's a great friend of the ensemble. And he told me at some point they had to reduce the number of orchestras they had playing on the festival, which is such a funny concept for someone from the U.S. where like orchestras hardly play new music. So I think like we can say, I'm sure it's the biggest new music festival in Mexico, but I think that I bet a U.S. audience doesn't know how extensive and intense and kind of overwhelming this festival really is. So
yeah,
please,
and it's also continue. Like very strongly subsidized by the government. So like, for example, a ticket to go listen to like the Arditi Quartet, for example, or like Ensemble del Niente, or these great ensembles from everywhere, like Mexico, Latin America, and the world in general, they're like $1, literally. Like a little beyond like 25 pesos, which is nothing. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it was a sort of, I remember actually buying a ticket, for some concert, right? And it's, because the dollar sign, it's the same for pesos and for US dollars. And so I like saw, I think I saw a ticket for 25 pesos and I was like, wait, did they put the price in US dollars for some reason? But no, it's like actually just, you can see anything in a lot of concerts take place in the Palacio Nacional de Bellas Artes, the huge Palace of Fine Arts in kind of in, what's the name of that park?
It's near the Alameda.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's just this beautiful building, and the halls are beautiful, and like here I am, paying 25 pesos to see, the Arditi Quartet.
I know, it's insane.
It's insane, and just, I mean, I think also, thank you for bringing up the government subsidies, because that's again for like, a U.S. audience. It's so, it's such a different and refreshing way of doing things that that sort of the Mexican government values arts enough to like subsidize this festival so extensively.
Yeah, and I mean, despite all the issues that we have and like a lot of defunding the arts in general, it's really remarkable that like people who don't have a lot of money, like, I mean, for example, when I lived in the US, in Mexico City, I really didn't have a lot of money. Like sometimes even to take the metro, which is also super like strongly subsidized, is 5 pesos. It's nothing. It's like, I don't know how many cents that is in the US. It's like 2 cents or something. No, that's not true. 20 cents. 25 cents.
I think the L in Chicago, which, gosh, I haven't taken the L in 7 months because everyone's stuck at home, but the L is like what, $1.50 or $1.75?
No, it's like $2.50. Is it really? Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a lot. And the cool thing is that like, even if you don't have a lot of money, you can still go to these concerts, but also to master classes with amazing composers and performers. And like, there's always these things going on. Like great, like Mexico in a way has made the system in which you can continually be going to either like the Colegio Nacional, where you have like some of the biggest minds in science, in history, in the arts, and they're like constantly giving master classes and talks and like charlas for free, completely for free, and you can continually be like absorbing a lot of culture for whatever it took you to get to that place. So that's something that is really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to turn this into like an advertisement for like for Inbal or for Jose Julio.
Yeah.
But it is worth just remarking on, like, well, first of all, Jose Julio is just a wonderful guy, and
He is.
but also it's such a great festival, and we should really acknowledge that. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please.
No, it's okay. I agree that it's important to talk about governmental, involvement in funding the arts. Yeah. So where was I?
We were talking about, so the piece was originally written for Quint's Contemporary Vocal Ensemble, and then we approached you about a piece to play on the foro, and I think we had a lot of conversations, but it seemed like the best idea to create a new open instrumentation version of Tinta Roja, Tinta Negra, I think, is where we were.
That's exactly how it happened. Yeah. Yeah, also that's true. We didn't exactly talk about what piece it was going to be, and then after talking, it was like, okay, this could happen. This could be a piece there could be an arrangement for open instrumentation, and we could have different versions of this depending on who's available and all of this. So yeah, I made an arrangement for 5 unspecified instruments, although each instrument should have some specific qualities, right? Like they should be able to sustain pitches, they should be able to play microtones, and etc. So I made that arrangement, and I also made an arrangement for a Hasco duo that is actually recorded in their recent album, the same. Oh, actually, I lost you. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, The Same Old Wonder.
The Same Old Wonder.
Yeah, and we do have a little bit of that. We can play a little bit of that album if we'd like, but
great, yes. And it's also one of my most favorite versions. It was incredible to work with them because, it just changed so much. Like, for example, the original version from the open instrumentation version, they are very similar in many ways, but with the Hasco duo version, for some reason, it just like took a different life. And it was something super interesting. And of course, it had everything to do with the amazing musicality, and also like all the energy that Amanda and Jesse put into it. So it was amazing to work with them. And also with Niente, it was very interesting to try to mimic this thing of the jarana, right? Like, okay, we can't have this big ensemble playing towards the jarana and with the piezo microphones and all of this. So how can we bring that to the piece? So what we did is that we use the jarana, that's why Michael has one, as the resonator for the electronics. So with a transducer, we put the transducer in a very specific place in the jarana, we tune the jarana in this very specific way, and then the electronics run through that, through it. So they're only coming from there, which is also interesting in live performance. I remember when you played it in Bellas Artes, even I, who knew that where the sounds were coming from, I was a bit surprised, like when I started hearing these things coming from I don't know where, in this very particular way, with this very particular timbre that the jarana gives to it. So that was really, really wonderful.
Yeah, why don't we there's lots to say, isn't there? Why don't we listen to a little bit of the version that Hasco Duo has recorded, and
great.
just so we get a sense of what the piece is like. But yeah, it's the thing that's really interesting to me is, I think you've successfully accomplished the thing that you set out to do, which is to sort of like render the overall status of the piece kind of uncertain or something like that. It's like there's these kind of like multiple layers of obfuscation. There's sort of like, there's the actual source of the text. There's this old text itself, which is already obfuscated, as you've said. And then, there's sort of like, the singer sings a small number of syllables kind of without semantic content, and like the pitches are often the pitch center is obfuscated by microtones, and then the actual sound. Yeah. I mean, I had the same impression conducting it. It's sort of like, what is the source of the sound, or something? You know, there's a kind of like acousmatic quality to it, where it's like, you know, what I don't know. It makes you ask some sort of like college freshman philosophy class question, like, what is sound anyway, man? You know, that's kind of like, that's kind of how I feel listening to a piece like this. So let's listen to a little bit of Amanda and Jesse's version. So I think I have to share my screen. Great. So we can stop there for a moment. You know, I also like, you know, kind of other pieces that occur to me as like not exactly analogs, but that I think of when I listen to a piece like this is something like, you know, the Chelsea piece. What's it called? It's, you know, it's for well, Chelsea has a couple of pieces like this where he, like, the singer is singing in a made up language. There's also a piece by Vivier called Bukhara, where again, like, it's the soprano is singing in a made up language. And, you know, I think of pieces like that, but it's not like my sense listening to it is that it's not that she's singing in a made up language or some sort a fantasy language, you know, maybe a kind of like Orientalist language, something like that. That's not my sense. It's like, my sense is that, like, it would theoretically be possible to understand her if it were not so many, if it weren't for so many layers of like technological, you know, historical, and political kind of obfuscation. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it feels like simultaneously kind of sad, maybe also like a little creepy, and like even ominous. I don't know. Those are just the things that I'm thinking about when I listen to it. I don't know whether that is totally wrong.
No, no. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I mean, it was really clear to me that since it has voices, we would immediately associate what is coming out of them as language, like spoken or verbal language, right? I did try to maybe not avoid that, but like to take a different turn into it, like by only using 3 syllables. And actually, the syllables were chosen. So it's interesting. This whole piece goes back to Liz, Kaylee, and Amanda so much, because the whole piece is made within their ranges. That's why when I was trying to say like soprano and alto, I don't remember because I wrote their names and their ranges specifically, and it's all about them, and also about the way that some pitches sounded with different vocals. right? We experimented with many vocals with the jarana when they were singing towards it, and I was very interested in seeing, depending on what vocals, what overtones were like. How do you say excitado? Is that the same word? Excited?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's the same. Yeah.
yeah, or activated. And we found that these three vocals, which are like very similar, which is like and o, uh, generated an interesting game with the overtones of the jarana, um, with their voices in specific, right? Maybe with other people's voices, it would have changed a little bit, or I don't know. So at the end of the day, it was like the very physical and the like bodily things that made me use those sounds, right? Like the jarana itself and Amanda, Liz, and Kaylee. So I didn't want to use any part of the text. I don't know why. Maybe because of these feeling of it being such a shadow that it would, like, at the end of the day, I was trying to portray my own feelings about it and my own, like obfuscations with regards to it. So to me, it was really not necessary to refer to the words within the text at all. It was more like the impression that they gave me. So it's very interesting to hear what you're saying about like something that could maybe be understood. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know. Maybe the other thing that I think about when I'm listening to a piece like this is like it is exactly, again, I think you've accomplished what you set out to do. There's this, it is it sort of like lives in this dialectical mode between like the highly personal and the highly collective or something
Yeah.
like that. Where yeah, exactly, it does read as, you know, you working through some feelings that are particular to you, that maybe are partially about your mom and your sister and your relationship with uh, with these three women, these three singers. And it's, I mean, I think it's so interesting. Also, yeah, you kind of forgot what their fach is, like, which is, it's so funny. I mean, in music performance, so many times, and I think about this in rehearsal as a conductor, you refer to musicians by their instrument or by their voice type. So I just find myself even conducting orchestras being like, okay, first clarinet, be louder, okay, first bassoon and first, oboe. And it's not like I don't know their names, but it's, it's like that we sort of end up identifying, we kind of dehumanize people in a sense by calling them by like the thing that they do, rather than being like, no, it's a person. And like, so taking your feelings and the particular way in which their, vocal cords work to produce these overtones, to make a piece out of that is like also about kind of a very long history, 500-year history of colonialism, of like the destruction of civilizations, about that's about, that's a piece that maybe in a sense also about historiography, like what is a history, what history existed and what history is told.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
That's very
like
important.
that kind of like, it does, I love the way that it does both of those things at the same time.
Nice. That's very interesting. And I mean, it's really accurate to the way that I see it and the way that I feel it. Um, because also, I mean, you said something that is really important. That is like, I mean, the personal is always collective in some way, because we don't live in a void, and even the separation between what we consider like ourselves and what we consider others is like even physically not so tangible, or not so, it's really even not so easy to say when does one end. So definitely everything that is personal is collective, and therefore is inevitably political, right? And political in its very broad sense. And something that it was really also maybe hard to accept, which is like, if you think about it, it might be crazy, but I think many people in Latin America feel the same way, is to be able to reconcile the birth of your culture and maybe your identity. Although I don't love the word identity, I think it's like very easily, it's very easy to fix it to some names, but like it's really hard to reconcile the birth of everything and that you feel that you are and that you grew up with something as painful as colonialism and well, the death of so many cultures, people, of course, languages, epistemologies, and also the nature around all of these cultures, which has also been destroyed. And it's also really important to talk about how that colonialism, as you said, has been going on for 500 years. It hasn't stopped. It wasn't only the Spaniards; it was also the mestizo government, the people in the government, and like actually, when you try to point at who did this, it's not that easy. Like in life in general, right? That's why like fascism is so appealing, because it's telling you this is the bad, like bad people look like this and they do this, and actually, well, no. If you look into the history of Mexico, most of the bellic conquest was done by indigenous groups, because actually the Spaniards were very few. The thing is that, I mean, it didn't really work out for them later, but yeah, it's kind of like this very convoluted histories and collective memories and feelings and clashing feelings sometimes also.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's great. There's a lot there, and I think yeah, I think like that's something. It strikes me that like maybe new music is a good place to explore those complexities and those convolutions, let's say, because I think like new music in particular, because I would say among, I don't think I've ever said it quite like this, but in terms of fascisms, the classical music field might, the classical music field is easily and has been co-opted for fascistic ends. Maybe precisely because it's so abstract otherwise, and you can just easily sort of like put, you can try to fix its meaning and tell people that, that Beethoven was a Nazi, or that Beethoven was a Soviet, or that Beethoven wants liberalism or something like that. I was, last spring I was doing some work on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and it's so interesting, like how every single culture co-opted that piece for its own political ideology. But I think like it's a thing that new music does, is it sort of it does essentially, at its core, it should question the kind of historiography of music, right? Which is like which has been co-opted, which has been sort of fixed and reified in certain ways, and like part of what new music can do is like undo that reification, perhaps.
Yeah, or question it, or it's interesting because new music, what some people call new music, it's a
Yeah,
complicated term itself,
we
right?
can't even agree on the word, which is great. It's like contemporary classical music, or new music, or experimental music, or creative music, or improvised music, or electronic music. It's just like it is like, I feel like that's the most litigated question in the field, is what do you call the field?
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the beauty to it, right? That like, because it escapes a lot of the names, because it's actually so plural, it allows for more things to happen and less things to be, as you said, like reified. What I love about new music is that for the, maybe not for the first time, that's probably historically incorrect, but I feel like it's a space in which even its own origins can be really, what's the word? I don't want to say subverted, but I mean, for example, why is new music, or like classical music, and therefore new music, maybe so widespread? It definitely has to do with European colonialism and European culture being taken to everywhere in the world, right? So that's a reality, and that's that. But at the same time, it's amazing how new music really allows for everything to happen to it, and it's a music that can actually be used to question many of the things that it carries. It's a music that can just give so much, because it's just so malleable, and that's why I think it also it kind of like avoids terminology, because many of the ways in which it is being used kind of like contradict others. So you say like, these cannot be in the same place, but maybe they can. I don't know. So that's actually why I think I'm doing this. It's a very fertile ground, like at least creatively, for exploring almost anything in many ways, and even with music that using music that can seem very conservative because it allows that also.
Yeah, and of course, not that you're saying this at all, but I think neither we are both deeply aware that the so-called new music field also has like very deep problems.
Yeah.
But it's, which of course you're not saying it doesn't have problems, but I think it is nice to be able to sort of be in a field that like has problems, but where you can say part of the discourse of the field is like, let's talk about the problems that this field has, which are numerous. Yeah, I didn't know we're going to go to like, sort of like 10,000 foot what is new music land, but it's always good to just go places.
Yeah, I mean, what you say is also really important. The fact that it can criticize itself and question many things, and maybe find some answers, like kind of like, I mean, there's many people that say that you cannot use the same tool to dismantle, like the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. And that may be true, but I think that new music really allows you to, at least with those tools, construct other things, maybe build another house, but with those same tools and others. That's fascinating. And maybe not every field allows that in the same way. That's what I think. Agreeing with you that there's a lot of problems.
Yeah. Right. No, yeah, I think just in my, I definitely oscillate between being like feeling great about the field and feeling like very pessimistic, though that's just like, that's life in October of 2020. So
yeah,
that's just every day, is alternating between hope and despair. Maybe, I would like to talk about some other pieces of yours, but before we do that, maybe I did want to mention this lovely Jarana. I wanted to mention the fellow that we got it from and the organization that he runs. And it maybe and there's a little video that we can play. But it's an organization in Mexico City called the Jóvenes Orquestas, excuse me. And remind me of his name, the gentleman that runs it.
Juan Carlos Calzada.
Right. And he is an instrument maker, and also runs this orchestra of, it's like a I suppose you'd call it a youth orchestra in English, but it's not, an orchestra in the traditional sense. Do you want to say anything about that organization?
Sure. And I mean, I might be leaving out some important details because I've only helped with some concerts or things in it when I was living in Mexico City. But Juan Carlos is the father of one of my best friends in Mexico City and main collaborators, Gustavo Calzada. So I was able to kind of like witness this social program that actually Juan Carlos started on his own when he retired. He was like, okay, I'm going to go to these very poor neighborhoods that have a lot of problems, of course, and I'm going to start teaching Mexican traditional music to the kids. He believed that could make a change in people, and he was right. He was like perfectly right. He started playing like in a corner in an alley, and then some people started approaching him. He's not like he went like, hey, like everybody, like I'm gonna teach you music. He just started playing, and then people started approaching him. And I mean, it wasn't that long before he had 20 kids who would go every Saturday, or I don't know exactly what day or days a week they meet to learn to play jarana, to play requinto, which is also another Mexican instrument from Veracruz, to learn how to do the zapateado, like the foot stomping, to sing, to play percussion. And these kids didn't do it. I mean, some of them did it only for a couple of weeks or months, but I know kids who have been doing that for years now. And their lives have changed so radically because they had something that they could be passionate about, something that could also open many doors for them because they play in a lot of different places. It keeps them busy and it allows them to express themselves, because this is a type of music that is able to not only to express very deep feelings with the music that already exists, but also to improvise a lot and create your own verses at the moment and express the way that you feel. It's a beautiful, beautiful project. So Ensemble Niente, when they needed a jarana, they bought this jarana from Juan Carlos, also to support him in his project.
And there are videos of the ensemble playing, and we can play one. So Igor can insert that later.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that information.
My pleasure.
Let's yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about your series of pieces called Bestiario. And there's four of them, I think, right? Four? Are there five now, or
I'm writing the fifth one. Yeah.
writing the fifth one? And I mean, so I feel like you share something with one of my other favorite composers, Carola Baukholt. Do you know Carola at all?
Yeah. She went to Mexico once, and I was in a conference. I think I don't know how. Yeah, like a charla. How do you say charla?
I'm not sure. I don't know that word.
It's kind of like a lecture, but it's not a lecture. It's like more informal.
Oh, huh. Yeah. What do we Q&A probably?
Yeah, but it's also not exactly like that. I don't know how to say. I mean, but like this ensemble, Liminat, I think
Yeah,
performed
Liminat. Yeah.
music, and yeah, I saw her from far away.
Well, I mean, but I think she's also a great friend of Del Niente's, and she sort of shares your interest in you know music that involves humans and non-humans. And but I think she might approach it a little bit differently. But yes, but tell us. I think it's a small number of composers that have this interest. I think like a lot of composers really think of probably just unconsciously think of music as a fundamentally human thing, a human mode of expression, maybe like even a human mode of thinking about time, and maybe you have a different view of this. So tell us about your thoughts on non-human music, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually very central to my dissertation. So I'm still finding many ways to talk about this. I realized that like speaking to the members of my committee, and like when I'm sharing many things, many thoughts, and many ideas that I have, and I want to write them down, I realize that I'm still not able to express them very clearly because of the answers that they gave me. It seemed like they were constantly thinking that I was saying something or meaning something other than what I meant, kind of like trying to say, to reinvent the wheel in many ways, or to express something that is completely new. And the truth is that I'm really not. And yeah, so because of that, I just want to say I'm still not able to really put this in words in a very eloquent way. But talking about,
I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think that's totally understandable. If what you're doing is talking about a non-human thing, language, of course, is like the most human thing, or something. Is like language. I mean, Lacan would say language is like constitutes human consciousness or something like that. So or unconscious. So that you couldn't actually speak eloquently about it. I think I'd be worried if you could speak eloquently about it. So go
maybe
ahead.
not with words, maybe not in English or in Spanish. Like, I mean, that's the thing that I'm really interested in. I'm not so sure that language is so uniquely human. I know that written language is definitely very human, and maybe going back to David Abrams, that's one of the issues, right? But I think that I'm going to use the term more than human than non-human, also because this allows us to position ourselves not so necessarily as something and other, but as something that is part of many things, and kind of like to use this Husserl, I don't know how to mispronounce that well, but the phenomenologist, kind of like this life world that we're living in that goes beyond each other, like every individual's subjectivity. So we live in this, and we cannot disconnect ourselves from each other. And having said this, and having like with this point of view that is also so manifest and so present in so many indigenous cultures, like from everywhere, from the top of Canada to the Mapuches in the south, also in the Pacific Islands, or even the Sami in Norway, this positioning of the human as only another part of everything allows us to also see the boundaries between ourselves and others blur, right? And if we think about this in many, many different ways, we can also definitely include music, and music that different types of music. I think that oral languages are very similar, or like are very close to a lot of traditional music, especially traditional music that is not notated, that is constantly changing, evolving. That you have, I don't know, for example, going back to Son Jarocho, because that's probably what I know best, even though I'm still very ignorant. You have the
Sorry, and just to be clear, Son Jarocho is like it's like the folk music from Veracruz. Is that
yeah,
right? Yeah.
and from a very specific part of Veracruz called the
Uh-huh.
Sotavento,
Uh-huh.
and it's like in the southeastern, and you have different towns in the epicenter of where this music was created, and you go from one town to the other, and they just have so many different things, like different tunings of the jarana, different ways of performing pieces, different instruments sometimes, or variations, of course, of the same instrument. And this like extreme biodiversity that these types of music has, and like also languages, specifically oral languages that are less I keep using the word ossified, and I don't know if the word correct term, but like, more solidified into what they can be, is something that I think is very close to everything in the world. Like the songs of birds, the sound of, I don't know how to. Again, I'm really bad at saying this. Maybe because of what you say is like with this language in particular, and this episteme is really hard to convey that. But I also think that's why music can be so powerful, because it really goes beyond the referential quality of the language, of the spoken language that we have. When I tell you bird, you can picture a bird, but the word bird and an actual bird, they're so separate in many ways, right? Like, so maybe if we try to not use this referential quality or semantic quality of words, there's something that can point at different aspects of life that are maybe more difficult to pay attention to. Again, I know this is not very clear, but I'm thinking of an example, a very personal one. I moved to Aguascalientes, back to Aguascalientes a month and a half ago, and I moved with my wife Ana. She's from Puerto Rico, and something that we have been realizing is that my music is very influenced from the sounds around. But here's the thing: I don't know what happens with Aguascalientes, but like it's not only me, because Ana also told me you hear weird sounds all the time. It's like, I don't know what's the deal, but you hear this thing that kind of sounds like something in between a truck and a wasp. And you're like, what on earth was that? And we're constantly telling each other, like, did you hear that? Yes. What was that? I don't know. It sounded weird. And I feel like my music is very much like that. Like, so hearing, or it strives to be like that. Hearing things that are not necessarily one, is not necessarily a saxophone. It's something else. And this quality of being one and many, or this quality of not being just one identifiable and kind of like ossifiable thing, something that is really important to me. And maybe exploring these types of music only for me, I'm not necessarily hoping that other people, when they hear it, they have these impressions, but really allows me to see the not oneness of individuals or the things. Things are not one thing only. They cannot be, because it's only when we made them be one thing is that they are to us, right? But like it really, maybe ontologically speaking, their ontologies escape our or taxonomies, and I think that's really cool.
Right. I guess that's interesting. That's a more, thank you for nuancing. I feel like a word that I often think of when I think of your music is a word like hybridity, but you're not really talking about that. I think you're this sort of like, there's, it's not that it's like a hybrid of two things. It's like it's not that it's more than one. It's, your music has more than oneness or something like that. Which is sort of like, I don't know, I'm a white dude from the U.S., so of course I tend to think of things in terms of like the bourgeois individual subject, and like one thing that your music might do is it might like reveal the truth of moving beyond the fiction of the bourgeois individual subject. So I don't. Now I don't feel like I'm being very clear either, but again, these are difficult questions to be clear about. Though maybe what we could do is we could actually use the example of these pieces called Bestiario, and you could talk about maybe you could talk about the violin one that you wrote for Maeve Feinberg from Spectral Quartet.
Yes, of course. And I just want to say that what you said is really interesting. I think it's definitely something very cultural. And I mean, you mentioned you being a white dude from the US, right? But I think it's very widespread in general. This idea of the individual. Yes, it's very Western, very European, but also I'm just going to touch this and run away from it. But I didn't come up with this, but I think it's true. It also has a lot to do with Abrahamic religions shaping this idea, for example, the one God. That, of course, yeah, it's very plural and many. It's nuanced, but it's one God. And this is like the idea of a true God, something that actually in most other religions is not present. Like if you go back to, for example, Germanic religions and many indigenous religions, they talk about their gods and other people's gods and other cultures' gods. And that was something that was widely accepted. It's not like the idea of a true God is actually not that recent, not that old, it's pretty recent in terms of human history. And I think the widespread of these religions that has taken over all the world is very specific. I don't know, it's very relevant to the way that we see this idea, you know. And it's very interesting because we usually relate Christianity with European culture. Well, I mean, Christianity is actually a Middle Eastern religion. It's in the same way as Judaism and Islam, and you see how many things they share. And it's interesting that it also had to do. It was developed in a place where alphabetic writing started. And I mean, of course, there's no way to say that what I'm saying is true, but also to make it even more complex, it's something that it's widespread, not only culturally, but also in terms of religion, in terms of history, and that is very present all over the world. And I think that some of the few places where these kinds of ideas about oneness and individual and all of this, when these are contested, are places that have pre-modern beliefs. Modern talking about, for example, like the Renaissance and all of this, right? So all the places with indigenous cultures that are very old, or Buddhism, or all of this. And this is not to say that Abrahamic religions are bad or anything. You know, I grew up Catholic. It's just that it's a quality of it. An interesting one that is relevant to point at, and in this case, run away because it's such a deep subject.
Yeah, no, that is really like that's great sort of a thing to contemplate and think about. You know, for me, I mean, because I don't tend to think of it in those terms. I really tend to think of sort of an even more recent phenomenon is sort of being responsible for like individualism and oneness, and I tend to think of like that as being a capitalistic kind of phenomenon, or like a phenomenon of like modernity, and I think the sense in which you're using it, the sort of like post-Renaissance kind of. But yeah, I think actually identifying it as maybe a deeper quality of Abrahamic religions is, yeah, I'm not used to thinking of it that way. So thank you for that.
It's interesting. It's really complex, but yeah, like Abrahamic and alphabetic writing and yeah, all of these kinds of things. Yeah. It's just something to consider.
Yeah, and Derrida would agree with you, right? With like sort of the notion of like logocentrism, the notion of like the logos, the both figurative and metaphorical word, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very ignorant of Derrida. I have read his stuff, but I cannot.
Speaking of a person that also doesn't always communicate clearly.
I mean, it's really hard. Yeah. But yeah, like, I mean, so now pointing at like my practice as a means to explore these different ideas about oneness, or about different levels of interrelatedness with everything that surrounds us. Not even only like what we consider living beings, but also things that we usually consider as inanimate, you know. I'm not talking only about rocks or tables, but also, which also have a lot of agency in our lives, it's very evident, but also in general, the general landscape, the general weather, the climate. So talking about this and kind of like exploring the idea of blurring these epistemological divisions between what I consider me and others. I started with a cycle called Bestiario, which, I mean, I'm sure most people know, but just to give some context, the bestiarios were these like text from the Middle Ages that it was like a compendium of beasts and animals. Some of them were real, or like, I mean, real is also a weird word. Some of them you could actually find very easily, in the physical world, and some of them were more like imagined. A lot of bestiarios were made of the Americas when the Europeans started coming, because it was a phenomenon made in Europe. And I think it's fascinating. It also has been used in literature to talk about different types of people. For example, like Juan Jose Arreola, right? They're like beasts, but he's actually referring to, well, I mean, I think he's referring to different types of people. So this compendium of beasts was really interesting to me to see, like, how can music not necessarily, or language cannot talk to things or talk about things, but how can we like talk with? It's like a slight change, but that it may be in words, but it's a big change in terms of what you are doing. Something that has been really influential for this has been a learning about many different indigenous languages, like for example, Tojolabal or other Mayan languages. Tojolabal is speaking mainly in Chiapas, in the highlands of Chiapas. And I read this book, Los Hombres Verdaderos, by Carlos Lenkesdorf. He has a weird last name. In which he talks about, he's a linguist, and he talks about this quality that Tojolabal and other Mayan languages have, that he calls intersubjectivity, which means that it's something that for us who speak Indo-European languages, we cannot really understand, because, for example, when I say I'm speaking to Michael, you are the object of the sentence, and I'm the subject, and I'm speaking to you. You're not doing anything. But in these languages, you cannot do that. The way that I would say it, which sounds really weird in English, but that's just to approximate, it would be like, Michael allows the quality for me to speak to him. So there's agency on your part. You're not only being the object of what I'm doing, but also you're allowing me to speak to you. And when you do this in many different levels, in many different ways, there's different types of intersubjective sentences. It's interesting when you see the way that these people relate to not only other humans, but also other animals and plants and objects. The way that they treat each other changes. We could argue if it's better or worse. It just changes. And I think that's fascinating, because you're not speaking to, you're speaking with. How can music do that? How can we make music with? And maybe it's not possible in terms of like imaginary animals or actual animals or whatever, but I wanted to give it a try. So the idea of Bestiario is to write pieces with, this is an important part, with an imaginary animal. So how I do it, the with part, well, it's kind of like when a writer is writing a novel, and he has he develops this character, maybe Michael Lewanski, right? So he creates Michael Lewanski so well that he cannot just decide that Michael Lewanski will start doing things that Michael Lewanski wouldn't do, because like otherwise the story would really suffer, and it just be really weird. Like, really, like now Michael's voting for Trump? Like, it doesn't make sense. And if you really create this character and you're faithful to it, it has agency, and you have to be that agency that has agency over your story and over you. So what if I do that with the animal? So what I did is that every time I worked with one of these pieces, I meet with performers. It's a very close collaboration, and we explore sounds of their instruments that can be this thing that we were talking about, kind of like sounds that can take us a little bit away from the actual instrument. Something that kind of sounds like a violin, but maybe like something else, or something kind of sounds like a saxophone or like a whatever. And I use electronics also to enhance this, but the techniques are really important. And then we develop sounds, and then I listen to them for hours and hours and hours, and I start imagining what they're telling me. And I start constructing these animals in these very particular situations. And I have been successful in different degrees with these pieces. But with the piece that I wrote, Bestiario 3, for Kyle Flens and Jesse Langen, it was one of the strongest experiences of this, because this animal that I made really made me or forced me to do things that I wouldn't have done in other pieces.
Oh, wild. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Can we play a little bit of that real quick? Just because
Yeah.
there's this one really like striking moment in the piece that listening to it, let's see if I hope I'll approximately find like where it is. But yeah, I would just love to get, and I don't have a theory about it or anything. I just think I just like we get to this moment in the piece and it just like it's like some unknown important thing happening. So let's play a bit of it and you can say a few things.
Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I don't have an intelligent thing to say about that. I mean, you know, what just I feel like I have just an overly literal reading of that moment where it feels like it actually does feel like an animal, an unknown animal in another room or something like that. It really like um, I feel like
That's super cool. It's exactly what it is. I mean, not a room, not another room, but okay. Sorry, keep saying.
no, it's right. I mean, we're speaking in these very like abstract and difficult to talk about terms. So it's striking to me that I have like almost a kind of specific image when that moment when Kyle is with the Super Bowl is, I don't know what that surface even is.
It's a tile.
It's a tile. Okay. Yeah.
Or maybe, I mean, there's a tile and there's a wooden piece. So I don't know which of it's one of either. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, I almost have like, yeah, actually a pretty specific image in mind. And it is of like an unknown animal in another room where the door is closed and you can hear, and it also reminds me of, I have these two cats and I do so much kind of, especially being home all the time, after 7 months, I do so much kind of trying to like figure out what they're saying, and it's like, it's maybe a similar emotion to what I had with like with Tinta Roja. Like I had the sense that I could understand them if the circumstances were right. I'm always saying like like Ponce, like Ponce, like he that's one of my cats is called Ponce, actually, and he's and it's just it's kind of Ponce is this word that's followed me around in my life. Like that's actually where we met. We met in the Sala Ponce in which is amazing. But Ponce, my cat, he's always like, it always seems like he has clear desires that he's trying to communicate, but I can't know what they are. And so similarly, I like feel like there's an animal in another room that I'm hearing, and if I could just open the door, maybe I'd have a better sense of what this animal is trying to say to me. That's just my feeling listening to that moment.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that I mean, it's very related to our culture, the idea that communication has to do mostly with words, right? Like I kind of like this understanding usually related to I'm understanding the words that you're saying. I'm not saying you are doing that, but that happens to me. Like I wish I could understand you as in somebody else was speaking to me in Spanish, right? But the truth is that we communicate so much with our bodies, with our actions, with your gazes, and that is communication, right? And going back to the bestiario, I mean that moment. Actually, I have a friend, a very dear collaborator. I was a little disappointed with that piece because he felt like it was very kind of like literal in the sense of the animal. And I mean, even though I agree that this is the most literal one, I couldn't not do it. It was this thing of like, I mean, I don't expect people to imagine this necessarily. I want everybody to have their own image. But the animal that I created communicated with other animals who were very, very far away, probably in the sea, kind of like a whale or something, but not necessarily. Maybe in land. And so this gesture of is something that comes from another material that is kind of similar, but not really. And it was kind of like that same version of that material, but from far away. So the moment that I incorporated that, it was it's interesting how the mind works. I remember I didn't want to repeat it. I don't know, later, or I don't remember exactly, but I wanted to stop that before. I wanted that to be shorter. And I remember this character being like really upset at me, like how do you want me to speak and not wait for a response? It's kind of like, that's something that is insane. Why would I speak without actually wanting a response and actually wanting to hear that? And what I actually had to wait for that response to happen, for that response to be understood, for that response also to be repeated. Something that I wouldn't have done at all for like in my musical practice. And like this, there are so many aspects in this piece in particular, but also in others, that I'm like, I wouldn't have done that at all. Like this, I think this musically a little tedious, or I think is blah, 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 But then when I am working with this, I have to, and it's really cool because it has brought me outside of my comfort zone. It has really allowed me to write music that is different. And also it has translated to the way that I have related to some beings, like animals and human animals in my life. This kind of like making space for what is not me and allow that to be. Like I experienced that with mice, for example. I think I spoke about that with Ami, but also I experienced that here a lot in Aguascalientes because there's so many insects, which I love. And sometimes like that thing of letting something be and letting something do things that you're not necessarily comfortable with, as long as there's not like biting you in the face, of course, but like it has really changed the way that I live those things. It's crazy. Maybe somebody like could see this as a spiritual thing, or somebody could see this as like a purely psychological exercise. And what I think is that it doesn't matter. I mean, you can call it whatever. The thing is that actually it has agency over the way that I act and the way that I think.
Wild. Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. We're about out of time. I'm sad to say, because I wish we had more time. Because I'd love to actually, it'd be great to talk about all four pieces, and the fifth one. But I think unfortunately we can't do that. But just could you give us like maybe just a quick idea of what's up, what is up for you next? So you were in Chicago for a number of years. You just moved back to Aguascalientes. Please come back here sometime. Maybe after January of 2021. Let's hope. But yeah, what's up for you next? What do you have in the works?
Yeah, I would love to come back, and I plan to go back for a couple of things if they do happen. Yeah, like Nunc, for example, yeah. Or
and we'll have you on Ear Taxi with
Ear Taxi.
We hope, yeah.
Yes, and we're very, very happy and very honored to be playing there. Ear Taxi is also like something, maybe what gets closest to the Manuel Enriquez Festival, maybe. Do you agree with me?
We're trying our best to make it a cool event, but I think that I think Jose Julio has a couple of years on us, so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a different situation, but yeah, I mean, apart from that, Ana and I will probably be moving to Puerto Rico in March. Right now, we don't have a base. We just wanted to live in our countries, in our cities, for a little bit. The pandemic allowed that, and we're like, okay, let's do it. We want to be there. We want to also do things there as much as we can while we're there. See our families, of course. So after Puerto Rico, we have two options. And right now I'm following Anna because she stayed in Chicago for me to continue my PhD. She would have left. So now I'm kind of like returning this. I don't want to see it as a favor, but I'm trying to be reciprocal. So yeah, I'm gonna join her to wherever she ends up doing her master's degree. She has two options right now, either doing a master's in design in somewhere in Europe, like the Netherlands or Belgium, or she's also very interested in architecture. So we might move to the US for that, wherever she ends up being. So right now things are very unclear. Also, like as you know, the academic market is thinner than, I don't know, I don't want to say ever, but like that has been.
Yeah, market is a strong word, I believe.
Yeah, even so, yeah, exactly. So I'll continue composing, and I have saved money, so I'm gonna focus on my compositional practice and teaching for now. And was that the only question? Am I forgetting another question?
No, that was it. Just what was coming up for you.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm presenting well, that's not true. I was presenting my opera Árbol de Bocas, which translates to like Tree of Mouths, in May. With it's a piece for 24 voices, saxophone quartet, two semi-soloists, and two percussionists. And I was going to have noise saxophone quartet, and BCE, which is the Northwestern Contemporary Vocal Ensemble, and Kyle Flens and Mae Feinberg and Ben Roydell Ward, and it was going to be amazing. And no, so I'm going to try to see how I can make that work, because I'm also collaborating with some amazing visual artists, two filmmakers, Ilana Myers and Milton Guillen, who live in the US, but Milo is from Nicaragua, and Yane Bercote. I can't really pronounce his last name, but he's from the Netherlands and he lives there. So that's the whole team, and we're gonna find a way to present that somewhere. Maybe try to get some funding or whatever.
Amazing. Yeah, let me know when that's happening, and I'll be there.
I will definitely let you know. I hope that actually happens.
Yeah, great. Well, Luis Fernando Amaya, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Michael. Likewise, thank you for inviting me, and looking forward to the Library of Congress concert, and the concert this Friday that you're playing a lot of cool pieces.
Yeah, we're doing Vortex Temporum among other among other cool stuff. So yeah, everyone look out for that.
Yeah.
Great.